Yeah, that's right. We're back, and this ain't my first mortgage podcast. Welcome to the show where we discuss all things mortgage sales, industry news, interviews of the top mortgage professionals, and more. Strap on in, enjoy the ride, and welcome to Ain't My First Mortgage Podcast. Hey guys, welcome to Ain't My First Mortgage Podcast. I am Skip Wilcox, your host. Appreciate you coming on today. This is going to be a little different than what y'all may or may not be accustomed to on the show. Whereas with Big Skip Energy Podcast, I would always do an interview, that kind of thing. With this one, we're going to be doing things a little bit different. And so today is going to be one of those little bit different shows. And what I wanted to do is actually talk about a couple of things that are going on in the mortgage business right now. I thought it would be helpful if we could have a quick look at the talk around affordability thus far. Some of the different comments and that kind of stuff have been floating around out there a lot. And I think it would be helpful if we have a synopsis of what some of those initiatives by the administration are supposed to be, how many of them have actually taken effect, what the effect's going to be for some of the proposed ones, and that kind of stuff. So this one's going to be a bit more informational. We are going to keep it 15 minutes or less because I want y'all to be able to go about your day. But let's kind of just dive right into it, right? Hold on one second. I'll pull this up. Okay. So let's start off first and foremost with some of the Trump ideas that have come about. Now, by now, most of y'all have either forgotten about or just completely brushed aside the two ones from earlier, or sorry, towards the end of last year, the 50-year mortgage and the assumability / portable mortgage thing. These two things, guys, as I think by and large we've all seen, are completely useless. All right. 50-year mortgage is not a good tool. I don't care what borrower it is out there. Some LOs will say, oh, well, it really just depends on the person's situation and they need to be able to decide and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's true to a degree, but we've been down this road before. All right. When I was originating back in the early 2000s, still during subprime days, 50-year mortgage is not a new thing. There were a couple of old investors out there, like Fremont, I think was one. If y'all have been around a minute, you probably recognize that name. Maybe MLN, something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, 50-year mortgage, not a new thing, guys. And it was barely taken advantage of back then. I mean, such a small, minute number of those during the wild, wild west days were even taken on the books, and much less now. It was proven back then for reasons we all know, like the interest and just the lack of investor taste for it, that kind of thing. So that's off the table. All right. Let's look at the assumability / portability thing. Well, assumable loans, as most of y'all know, not new. All right. Govies oftentimes have assumable qualities to them. That's fine. It's not as simple as just taking over that mortgage. Portability, the borrower's taking the loan with them to the next house. That is simply not practical, guys, for a number of different reasons. Credit qualification, securitization. There's just a bunch of different things that prevent that from being a real solution to affordability. So those were two of the big ones. Now let's look at something else that's come up recently, and that is the Trump statement that he's going to prevent or forbid investor purchasing of 1 to 4 family homes or homes, whatever the specific statement said. Now we can get into the argument that the housing shortage is being exacerbated by large investor, purchases of a lot of these. But in most markets, it's simply not as big of an issue as it's being made out to be. Do I like it? Do I think it's right? Not necessarily. But at the same time, I also think that's being blown out of proportion to really sweep the real issue aside. It's just grabbing at straws. My friends in Atlanta, obviously, Atlanta is one of the highest or most dense markets for investor purchases. And in certain areas of the city, it does cause a problem for housing availability because companies are buying up these homes for the sole use of renting. But taken as a whole, industry wide, I want to say, actually, I'm going to look this up on the NBA website while I'm on here doing this. I want to say it accounts for maybe what 5%, something like that. Let's see. Give me 1 second while I pull this up. See, that's the cool thing about doing this is I can just do this while we're talking to each other. And it's just one of those things like all these little quick fixes, all these things that only affect a small percentage. They're just simply it's just simply not as big of an impact on affordable housing as it is institutional investors. Large funds and REITs account for roughly 1 to 4%, depending on how you define institutional, and 1 to 4% of housing. Now that's a lot of homes. Don't get me wrong. When you take individual investors like your landlords, individual folks that own several, now that's you get a little high. You get around 20%, but institutional investors, which is what's being discussed, is simply not that big of a deal. All right. And let's look at the $200 billion MBS directive that was, it did help improve the market a couple of weeks ago, but we've already seen some correction to that. That's simply a drop in the bucket. If we look at it in comparison to QE1 years ago, quantitative easing one, when that was something like 1.4 trillion in MBS, that really drove those rates down in combination with some other things from QE2 and that kind of thing. But if you take 200 billion compared to that, and that was years ago, so it's more like 1.8 trillion now, it's simply such a small percentage that that's just not going to drive rates down. Now, it's got some larger implications, don't get me wrong, but that again, not going to really have that big of an impact on affordability. And so then we're left with a discussion of, okay, so what is it? What's going to happen? Well, if we take affordability and we look at these short-term fixes, what's the overarching thing, guys? It's supply. We just don't have enough houses. This is a problem that could have been addressed years ago after the Great Recession and the financial crisis. We could have set the stage up for more robust housing now. But now we're having to reap what we sow. Credit standards going a little bit too far, too restrictive from years and years ago, all the way to now where we had COVID with material prices and of course labor shortage. We've had a number of different things come up. All of that to say it's the supply. We keep tinkering with things trying to incentivize and make financing more affordable. And I agree that financing affordability is a huge topic and we do need to talk about it. But at the same time, guys, that's not going to solve it. If we look at basic supply and demand, where you've got the old X graph from Econ 101, right? If we increase the demand, which in theory lowering rates would do, doing some of these different incentives that have been thrown out there with the tax deduction for PMI, whatever thing you want to throw out there, that in theory would increase demand and say, okay, yeah. Then what's that going to do without the increase of supply? It's going to move that demand curve up, and it's going to make the pricing higher. So we're going to have even higher prices than we do now in the short run. Now, in the long run, that may improve a little bit because a lot of those may be sellers that are going to have to sell those homes. Those homes become available and so on and so forth. But that's not, that's again, not what we're trying to do. And so what do we do, guys? We have to make home building more affordable, from taxes, regulations. We've got to be sure that we keep materials, as cheap as possible. These are big, big problems that require long-term solutions. And no matter what the particular political leaning is that y'all have got, the reason that these don't get talked about as much, except for in circles like MBA and our internal industry circles, is because they're not sellable politically, right? it's easier to sell a short-term band-aid than it is a long-term fix. You know, that's one of the biggest issues that we face as an industry is saying, okay, how do we focus on making financing more affordable, but also making homes in general more affordable? You know, there was a thing about manufactured housing and lifting some of the regulations on those manufacturers. That's fine, but that's assuming then that they are going to then drop their prices. If we look at, if we look at commerce historically, all that's going to do is increase profit margin. They have no they have no incentive to lower prices because their market has already seen a big portion of excuse me, their market's already seen higher prices, and so they're not just going to lower them back down. No, they're going to absorb those savings as profit. Now they might be able to churn out some more units, reinvest in some more labor, that kind of thing, but by and large, again, that's just not going to help in the short term. There is no short term fix, right? There is no easy fix to this, and I think that's what we have to remember. All instead of tinkering with rates and markets and that kind of stuff, I would much rather have pricing stability and then work towards slowing housing appreciation. Now, I know that that is going to be like blasphemy to a lot of folks, but I don't think that slowing appreciation is going to be a big deal. We have got to have a situation in which real wages have a chance to catch up to housing. That's simply not going to happen overnight. But you know, we're in this right now. We've got to try what we can do to get there, and it's just something that we're going to have to constantly talk about and work towards. So what I want to do is I'd love to hear from y'all as to what your opinions are on affordability. What do you think some possible solutions are? Because listen, this whole episode here, I have been telling you what's not right. I have purely given you no solutions because I don't have any. I don't have any above and beyond long-term efforts. I got nothing. If I did, I wouldn't be sitting here recording this podcast. But I'd love to hear what y'all think some real solutions could be to affordability, what some potential causes of the situation that we're in have been over the years, and kind of to start that conversation. That's what I'd love to hear from y'all. Now, one more thing before I call it a day here on this short episode is I want to talk about the issue of FICO. If y'all are folks who have been in the industry for a minute, you follow mortgage talking heads on social media, you know that FICO and the transition from a tri-merge to a single score model, that kind of stuff, all that's being talked about too. I just, you know, that's another complex issue that does not bode or does not breed good conversation about short-term solutions. It's not as simple as FICO would say it or say it is, and it's not as complex or as deadly to the industry as a lot of the critics would say. The answer is going to be somewhere in between. So I'd love to hear from y'all. I may actually talk about the FICO situation in more detail next time. But, you know, until then, guys, I appreciate y'all coming on this really quick, short episode of Ain't My First Mortgage Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Kind of get some juices flowing mentally, and let's see if we can't have a good conversation about this. And as always, if you're not involved in the industry on a broader level than you are right now, do it. Get involved in your local MBA chapters. Get involved in National MBA or any other trade groups that represent the interests of homeowners, mortgage companies, and anybody that's involved in home affordability. So, guys, see you next time. Hope you had a good time on here. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.